The topic today is called Map Your Way to Genealogical Success, and we'll get right into it. Mapping events in your ancestor's life is a fundamental part of genealogical research. Now, the reason for this comes about not by a design, not just because of genealogy. It's something that has been created as a result of decisions by many people over probably the last couple of hundred years. And that is how large collections of information are cataloged and how they are housed in various institutions, archives, repositories of all kinds, societies, libraries. And basically, beginning back in the 1800s and some earlier than that, the issue was, how do you organize all this? Well, genealogy as such became a category, and books about family history and genealogy in libraries are cataloged together. And then, but within genealogy itself, there has to be some way to organize the books and the records of genealogy. And the natural outgrowth of that was to organize everything geographically. So records from the United States are organized in the United States, and every state's part of that, and every county's part of that, and a lot of municipalities and cities are also part of the organization structure. And then every country of the world, literally every country of the world, is in a category. And in many places, like the BYU Family History Library, they're in alphabetical order. So you don't really get a geographic grouping of the webs of the various collections, but they're not side by side. In other words, Ireland isn't necessarily next to England, and England isn't necessarily next to Germany or anything like that. They're all kind of separate. So part of the challenge, if you will, of getting into genealogical research is understanding this process. Now, as on-site websites were developed, websites that like Family Search and Ancestry and MyHeritage and Find My Past, and there's quite a few others. Basically, they had to adopt, because of this pre-existing structure, they adopted the only obvious way to do that, and everything they have is also organized geographically. So if you want records on a specific person, you don't go to that person, you go to that geographic location of the events that occurred in that person's life. That's where the records are going to be kept. And so with that fundamental concept of how genealogy is organized, as we move into the very first rule of genealogy, and that is that when the baby was born, the mother was there. Now, this may seem a little bit off the wall, but basically, if you think about it for even a second, you'll realize that it's a physical reality. Babies were born, and the mother had to be there physically present when that baby was born. If you've done any genealogy at all, if you've be surprised to see how many times that's sort of ignored by various people when they start looking and say, well, this child was born here in Arizona, and the mother was in Massachusetts. And you go, well, okay, but how did the mother get to Arizona to have a baby and then get back to Massachusetts? So we say that here in the United States, and it sounds like, well, yeah, that doesn't sound very logical. So it's probable that that baby was not the child of that particular mother, and there must be some kind of misunderstanding or mistake. Well, that seems kind of obvious if you say it like that. But what if I say something like, well, okay, so the mother was in Lancashire and the baby was born in Kent? I mean, does that come? If you're very, very familiar with English geography, then that also comes up to mind. Say, no, that's going to happen. Not going to happen. Now, if the further you go back in the past, the more, let's call this strict this particular rule is, simply because of the lack of transportation. And if you're talking about anything before 1850, you probably have been limited. And I'll talk about that in just a minute and get a little bit more information. So if you go into the family search family tree, or any family tree, any one of the programs out there, if you go in there, and what you need to do is make sure all the dates and places are consistent with the time frame. So that's the three things: the dates and the places, and then in the context of the time frame when the events were supposed to occur. And that's the question. By just looking at it, you can say, well, okay, this baby was born in 1710, and the parents were born in 1805. Obviously doesn't work. Parents cannot be born after the baby is born. But you'd be surprised, you would probably not if you've been looking, that mistake is often made. And the admonition that comes with that is do the arithmetic. In other words, every time you see a date and a place, I was in the last couple of weeks that I was looking through entries, looking for entries, and found a family with 10 children, and all 10 children had been born between the time that the mother was born and when she turned 12 years old. And so all of these things, it's not great mathematical ability. It's simply being able to look at these, what's there in the record, and make some sense out of it. So let's see what that looks like. For example, here we have Peter Sutton, born in 1781 in Billinge, Lancashire, England, and then Anne Sutton and Mary Sutton and Thomas Sutton and Henry Sutton. And if you look at this real quick, you'll see a couple of things that you should notice in any kind of entry. First of all, we have two children that were born in the same year. And interestingly enough, they were born in different places. And so, is this possible? Physically possible. But given the date of 1784, it is highly unlikely. And so the question that comes up immediately when you read an entry like this, and this, by the way, was copied right out of Family Search Family Tree, why were two children born in the same year in two different locations? And when you ask that question, then you have to get into the historical context, and which is the time frame and the actual location of these places. So we take that one and say, well, that's probably the one that's out of place, because all the other children come from the same place. So now let's look at what happens there. And it's, if you were enough to extend this a little bit further in the way in looking at these entries, you'll notice that they're all, say, Lancashire, England, and the United Kingdom. Well, no, that's not quite right either, because the United Kingdom was not formed until 1801. So the place names are also technically wrong. So this is just the kind of thing that I'm talking about when we talk about the importance of the location. So let's just check here on this map. This is Google Maps. We're going to just check the distance from Billinge to Ashton in Makerfield, and we'll see how that works here. So first, we're going to go get the directions from Billinge to Ashton, and it comes right up. And then we see it on the map, and we can see that it's about 4.2 miles, and it would take about 9 minutes in the car. And this is the process that you go through. In other words, you go to Google Maps, which is available, or any of the other mapping programs, and just tell the distance and the time it would take to go that far. It's 4 miles, and walking, it would take maybe 90 minutes, or maybe if you were a mother expecting and you were racing across that distance to have your baby someplace so you could grab the baby and run back to Billinge, you can see that would be a little bit far-fetched. Well, this is within the range of the distance that even back in the 1700s was possible. But the question is still that the two children were born within the same year, and so we need to look further. And so, if there's a back and forth kind of thing, then you have to come up with some reason why that occurs. Otherwise, what you're looking at is someone who has been put into that family that does not belong. Okay, so more research, I'm not going to go through the research, but more research showed that the extra child was not part of that family. And then here's the resultant list of the children. In other words, there were more children than had been found originally. And in addition, they're all consistent in where they were born. It does not taking a great deal of effort. It's something that you can look at consistently, look at on any one of someone's family tree. If I wanted to do this, and I always have this standing offer to anyone to let me go through their pedigree with them, and in a matter of maybe a few minutes, I will find this kind of an error in a pedigree. It's not because the people that are maintaining the pedigree aren't competent or know what they're doing. It's just that, especially in the way that genealogy has evolved, that these errors are sometimes passed down through traditional family genealogies that have been given to people. And then because of that, and the timeframes in which those were done, there were these kinds of errors. But today they're still being made. People are still adding in duplicates and adding in structures that aren't correct.